So today we are going to repeat some of the things we learned last time. Good morning everyone, and thank you for giving me the stats again. If you recall, in the first session we covered some ground, and there we gave the title of probabilistic methods of machine learning. So today the title is probabilistic graphical models. So the way I have planned this talk is about an hour and a half, so it will be time for lunch. And what I will do is I will try to get feedback from all of you. Thank you very much for the feedback I got from the first presentation. So we are going to repeat just the first third part. 1/3 of the lecture will be repeat of what we covered in the first session, the area of probably the joint probabilities. And I have redone the examples, so these are not the same slides. Change the examples, and I have worked them out myself. So there are two aspects to that. One, I should be able to explain it better, and second, there still could be some errors because I did all the calculations myself. So it's not taken from any book. And what we will do is, so now as I go along, I'm seeing that you probably need 5 sessions. 3 is not going to be sufficient.
We are prepared.
Okay. So today I'm going to lay the groundwork for the most common technique, even before people started saying machine learning. If you just go back 20 years, the most popular technique in most of pattern recognition classification was the hidden Markov model, HMM. Everybody said we are using an HMM. Okay? And now we see that it actually fits in nicely under the larger umbrella of probabilistic graphical models. So what we will do today is we will build from bottom up the concepts and show how HMM fits in. And once we get that clear, you will see that many other such models are possible. Conditional random fields, Markov random fields, these we will cover in the next session. But you will see how this can lead to those next steps. Okay? So once again, my acknowledgements. Many of the nice color slides I have borrowed from the book on top, Simon Prince. I have also taken some examples from Bishop's book, and then I have also picked up from Daphne Gold's book. My 2 graduate students who have helped me with some of those calculations, and my own set. Okay. With that quick background, let's go back to random variables. Okay. So we said, what is a random variable? It denotes a quantity that is uncertain. It's a result of an experiment. So any experiment you do, and if the outcome is random, so like if you pick a coin, or a better example, as you will see later on in the slides, is let's say you are looking at the financial sector and you are looking at people's incomes, okay, different ranges, income from 0 to 100,000, 100,000 to 200,000 and so on. Okay, so there's a distribution, and I just go and pick one person and check what is that person's income, right? So it will fall in one of those categories. Okay, and there will be a probability as to which category it is going to fall in. So that experiment is also a random event. It will be represented with a random variable. So observe many instances, measurement values, repeated experiments can give different values. Some values occur more than others, and that's where the distribution comes in. So here is an example, and by the way, last time I think there was also some confusion with the notation I was using. I realized it myself, going back and looking at the examples. So I will try to get that sorted out today. So let us say I have an experiment, the random variable is capital X. Okay, that is the variable. Now this variable can take 6 different values. Okay, those are the 6 different outcomes of my experiment.
Why are they hatched? Please, you should have these values.
No, so that let me explain this. This is an important concept which everybody should get, so that we can go through these examples. The capital X is the random variable. That capital X can take 6 values, x1, x2, x3, x4, x5, and x6. Those are the outcomes of the experiment. Okay. Now, the distribution is telling you how likely any of those events are. Okay? So when I look at, for me, a random variable is, okay, I have a variable, these are the possibilities for it, and you have this showing the probability of each of those possibilities summing up all to 1. Okay? So this is important that the random variable x, it takes these as its values. So in the notation, the way it is written is capital X is equal to xi is a random event. So if you rolled a dice, where if it came up 3 on the top, okay, so that means the capital X is equal to x subscript 3. Okay, that's that event. And if you ask for the probability of that, that is this value. Okay, so now here's again the confusion in the notations. In books, usually they will not write as capital X is equal to x3. Okay, just to have a shorter notation, they will write it as probability of x3. What it means is the experiment capital X is equal to x3. What is the probability? Okay, so that is very important in the notation. So here, for example, I should really write it like this: probability that capital X is equal to xy. That means I did an experiment and the outcome of that experiment was 5 on top. Okay, and that probability, I go to the distribution and I check. Okay, this is 0.3. Okay, so this is the full notation, which usually gets shortened as this. So it's just written as probability of xy is equal to 0.3. Okay, so, and this will be very important as we go through the examples. This distinction between the random variable actually gets an event, okay, and then the probability of that particular. So probability of the dice roll showing 5 is written either like this, if you have the patience to keep writing it like that, or if there is no ambiguity, we'll just write it like that. Okay. Then I thought let's make up an example in the financial sector, okay? Not just rolling dice. Mehndra once told me, why do you always roll dice for all your examples? So I said, okay, we're going to do this. Look, make up an example like this. Let's say I'm looking at the size of home loan among people in Hyderabad, okay, or in this case New York. Okay. So what I will do is I will simply go and pick up a person on the street and ask him what is the value of your home loan. Okay. So that's my experiment. Okay. There is some underlying distribution, okay, of this. So if I pick this person, so that's my capital X. Okay, so you can see that these are the values it can take. When I did the experiment, I asked some person, what's the value of your home loan? He says, well, it is $75,000. So that means capital X is equal to this. So if I call this as x1, x2, x3, x is equal to x3, and then the probability is what is given over here. Okay? So instead of just rolling the dice, I have changed the example. And you can see once again now, capital X is a random variable. Those are the events. I have 7 different events over here, assuming I go up to $1 million. Now also in my notations from last time, because the textbook was using this and I have lots of my examples with these nice pictures, so let's understand what it shows. The same chart is being shown like this. So the bigger square means the taller bar. Smaller square means smaller bar. Okay? So this is allowing me, I'm taking away one dimension, so I'm able to show you like in a 2-dimensional plot, I can put the squares, essentially what you have are these bars. Okay? So you can see probability of capital X is equal to x1 is 0.25. I can show it like a square like that. 0.2, a smaller square, and so on. So what we keep in mind when we look at that chart is the relative sizes. Okay? Of course, you need to do the calculations, know the actual numbers, but I see that the probability of x is equal to x1, that means somebody's loan is
from 0 to 20,000 is more than somebody's loan is from 400 to 1 million. Okay? So the relative sizes is what that picture captures. So again, capital X is equal to x1 is 0.25, which I can also write as probability of x1 is 0.25, or what it actually means is the probability of a home loan being less than 20,000 is 0.25. Okay? So this is our notation, and there is some confusion sometimes because I will keep switching between capital X, small x, sub and so on, and I think if you have this in your mind, then there won't be any ambiguity. Okay, by the way, it's not just me, textbooks also will keep switching back and forth. Now those are for discrete random variables. So I made up an example for continuous random variable. So here, let's say in the 90s, the internet stocks would double very fast, right? In every few months, the stock value would go up. So if I'm saying this, how much time it took the stock to double? Okay, so this is 2 years, 0 years. So that's the capital X is that random variable. So I pick a stock, how much time would it have taken to double? So if you say X is equal to 0.7, that means in 8 months, I pick a stock, 8 months it actually doubled, chances are it's 0.1% here. I mean 10%, 0.1 probability. Okay? And 18 months, which is 1.5, is, whatever, 0.075. Okay, so the exact same concept, just showing in continuous. Okay, now again some pretty pictures that have drawn here. Now let's move to joint distributions, and this is where things get interesting because in machine learning, if we recall, the whole idea of modeling was I have measurements which I call X. I'm looking at out some classification or something which is Y, and how do these two things go together? I want to model. So that when you give me a new X, which I haven't seen before, I go to the model and I give you the Y. Right? We looked at some examples with straight lines, other curves, and other, like Gaussian and other things. So let's look at this example now for joint distribution. Let's say my loan size is on this axis. So I have 0 to 100,000, 100 to 250,000, 250 to 1 million. Okay? This is discrete, I have only 3 levels. And income, I have on the x-axis, 0 to 100, 100 to 250, and so on. There are 4 different buckets I have. Okay? So x, this is x, and that is y.
In the Y, you have got only 2 images?
3, actually 3, I didn't have space. So this is, the middle one is, so the 3, right? The blue, yeah, this is, so the 100 to 250 is there in the middle. Okay. So there are 3, so the y, random variable y, can take 3 values. y1, y2, y3. What it means is, you can actually get it into this bucket, or this bucket, or this bucket. X is a random variable, so capital X is a random variable, and it can take 4 values. You can be here, 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 or here. Okay? And now the joint distribution is shown for you. So you can, this is all very simple, right? I mean, you look at the chart and you say, what is the probability that somebody's income is between 100 and 250,000 and loan size is between 100 and 250,000. So you'll simply go to that particular slot over there and look at the height of the bar, divide by the total heights, you get your probability. Okay? So once again, see how we are using the random variable concept. The variable takes values of, which category you are going to fall in. And the probability of that is shown in that distribution. Okay? So now, these are again random images. Why are they random? Well, I just pick a person on the street. I don't know which category it would fall in, right? And I pick it in the street and I see which one it falls into. Okay, so that's the thing. And then next day I pick somebody else. It could be something totally different. Now, depending on how the distribution is in that city of home loans and incomes, you will have certain occurrences more than others. So now I'll write it like this: capital X, which is my random variable, is equal to xi. I can go from 1 to 4, and capital Y is equal to yj, where j can go from 1 to 3, are random events. So I can write it. Remember, the shorter notation would be simply pxi comma yj. So I could write it as x1 comma y2 or x2 comma y3 and so on. And that is the joint probability. Okay. So the long notation would have been, the correct way to write it would have been like this: x is equal to x1 and y is equal to y2 is 0.1. So x is equal to x1 is here, y is equal to y2 is here. So I'm looking at this bar. Correct? So I should have written it like this, but I can also write it like this because you can understand it means the same thing.
Probability that the loan is less than 100k and income is between 100 to 50k is 0.1. Okay? So that is essentially that particular bar. And if you go to our other notation,
Which I will also use sometimes, we are talking about that particular square block. Okay. Now you know how to go between these two. It's all that it is the height of the bar is represented as the area of the square. Okay. Then we also look at some examples with pictures like these. Now if both x and y are continuous, then you can imagine that this particular chart that I have would be some kind of a solid thing, right? If x and y were both continuous. So that's what you have as a picture over there. Okay? And in these pictures, the yellow, and if I just took a flat top view of that picture, it will be like this. So what we do is yellow means higher values and red, black is the lowest value in the height. Okay. This also can be shown as a contour map. This is not used that often. We have already seen in the discrete case how to show, correct? Then we can also show where one variable x is discrete, y is continuous, or vice versa, right? You can have continuous, continuous, discrete, discrete, or a mix. So if I have a mix, that means these values were discrete and these were continuous, then you will get these slices. Okay? Okay, now let's talk about the concept of marginalization. What is this idea? Well, marginalization is if I have two variables, I want to get rid of one of the variables. Okay, so I have a joint distribution of two variables x and y. I don't want to worry about y, I want to worry only about x, or only y and not x. So how do you do that? Is marginalization. If we go back to the word meaning of distribution. What is distribution? Is I have a total probability of 1 in my hand. Okay? How do I distribute it among the different categories? Okay? So in the x has 4 different buckets, y has 3 different buckets. So there are totally 12 different buckets in the joint. I have a total probability of 1 in my hand. How much of a fraction do I put into each of those 12 slots? So that distribution, the way I distribute it is the distribution that I'm showing. So now marginalization means the following. I am not interested in how you distributed it in the y buckets. I'm only interested in the x buckets. Or I am only interested in the y buckets, not in the x buckets. So what do? You essentially say, okay, I don't want the finer distinction of distributions along one of those axes. I just want to collapse them. That's what marginalization is. So in this case, let us say I want to collapse everything in this direction. That means I don't care about how within x you are distributing. That means I got so much here, so much here, so much here, so much here. I'm not interested.
take all these 4 bars, add them and put them here. Take those red bars, add them, put them here. Green bars, add them, put them here. So that the distribution on the x-axis is taken away. Okay? I'm only looking at the distribution in the y. So, if you take all the blue bars and say I don't care about how they are internally distributed within the x buckets, so I simply add them 0.25. So you say 0.05, 0.05, 0.05 and 0.1, that's 0.25. Okay? So the probability of y is equal to y1, and that means in the first bucket of y, I have 0.25. In the second bucket of y, I have 0.4. I simply added those red bars. And in the third bucket, I have the greens added, which is 0.35. So, if I did not care about the x direction at all, I only cared about the y direction. I'm telling you that whatever the home loans in the first bucket are 25%, then the next one is 40, and the next is 35. They all add up to 1. Okay? Joint distribution means, okay, now I'm also interested in this distribution in the x. Then you get the joint x. Now clearly you can see that I can do it the other way too. I can get the marginalization on the other axis where I collapse all the y values. So now I take these 3 bars, add them and put them here. These 3 add, put here, put here. So you have 4 buckets for x, nothing in the y direction.
Yes, the problem with the notation, P capital X is the marginalized in the x direction of a distribution xy. It can also be part of a distribution by itself of a single variable.
Yes.
So how do I?
Okay. So here is what you are absolutely right, and there is this. So from the context, I will figure out what we are talking about. Okay. So if I just did the additions like this, so you can see, I said probability of x1 bucket is this much, x2 is. So essentially, forget y. I have essentially what do I get? I got a probability of x in all the x buckets. Okay. I'm just saying, suppose there is no other random variable. X is the only variable now. So that's what I'm showing you here. Okay. But the capital, small, the subscripts, I have seen the same book that I'm using, they are mixing it up all over the place. But I'm hoping that today we all in this class understand this nicely. Okay? What is the random variable? What are these buckets? How is the joint? How is the marginalization? Okay. So you can see again there is a mix up here, but we will understand it very easily. We will say, okay, this is the joint distribution x and y. If I take away, this is the y direction, this is the x direction. If I take away the y, that means I just add up everything, I got this. Okay? And then this.
The only point is,
no, they put small x.
We are substitute y of bracket x compared to just arbitrarily PRX. PRX is distribution of x. But you are talking of obtaining from the joint distribution.
We are not making a distinction of whether you first had x, then you went to y and came back or not. We are not making a distinction. We are saying this is how x is distributed. If you want also within y, then you expand it, and then we'll have to tell you how it expands. But as I said, so now I would have put a capital X, they have put a small x. So, but we all know now what are they talking about. Okay. So same thing with the joint. Okay. Now some of the distributions across the variable to be marginalized or eliminated. Now we also know that if you had one side discrete and one side continuous, we can still do those same things, right? So this will be the problem. So all of these added together gave me the problem. Actually, I would have said capital X, but you know what it means. And then you can actually, so I talk about conditional X. So now we have 3 concepts we have understood. We understood discrete random variable. We understood that the random variable takes values which are categories or buckets and then there is a probability for that. You understood that part? We have understood what it means to do marginalization, right? We simply take away the final distribution along one of those variables, collapse them.
Now what is conditional probability?
I go back to my example here. So I have x is a random variable, y is a random variable. So x can take 4 different values. Okay, this is discrete. 4 different values, and y can take 3 different values. Okay. So together there are 12 possibilities. Those are the 12, and those are the probabilities I just made up. Okay. So it's 0.05, 0.1. The decimal point is gone. Okay. Now if I am looking at the joint, when x takes the value x is equal to x2 and y takes the value y is equal to y2, that's over here, we are looking from this joint distribution that it is 0.1 probability. Okay?
Now, okay, so those are the subvariables. So, if you just look at if I can say, how is this distributed when y is equal to y1? How is x distributed when y is equal to y1? Then you will say, well, it is distributed like this. Okay? Now keep in mind, this does not add up to 1 because the whole thing adds up to 1. But I can still figure out the relative sizes. I know, for example, that when y is equal to y1, these 2 buckets or these 3 buckets have the same values. That means when somebody has a home loan of from 0 to 100K, there are equal number of people who will have an income in this range, in this range, and in this range. I am not going to give it to you as probability, but I can tell you the relative sizes. Okay. Similarly, I can say if y is equal to y2, I give it to you, that I am only looking for people who have home loans in a particular bracket. How is the income distributed among those people? So I simply go and give you this row. Once again, does not add up to 1, but I know that this is double this, I know these 2 are equal, I know this is 3 times this, and so on. Okay. That proportion is not going to change. Okay. Similarly, for y is equal to y3, You are looking at those profiles. So, the conditional distribution.
so you might say, what does conditional distribution mean? All that I am saying is, if you give me the condition that y is equal to y1, that means if you give me the condition the home loans are less than 20,000 or 100,000, how are the incomes distributed? Under that condition, the distribution of incomes is like this. So this is the conditional distribution. And the formula for conditional probability, and let's understand this well, is given like this, and we'll see why. This means probability of x given y, read it as probability that capital X is equal to some x subscript given capital Y is equal to some y subscript. That's what this is. Okay? Is the joint, that location, divided by the marginal. So here is what is happening. If I want this probability, what you are saying is, this is essentially x given y. That means if I give you the y, that means I gave you, let's say, this row. I said that's the y value. I've given it to you. Within that, how is this value distributed among all those? So I know that this is 10 divided by 20, 35, 10 divided by 40. This is 1/4 of all the values here. Correct? This is 1/4 of all these values. So that's essentially what this is. 0.1 divided by 0.4. Because remember, all those added here will be 0.4, all those added here will be 25, 0.4, and all these added here will be 0.25.
Medium.
Correct?
Medium.
So that's what the marginal is. The denominator over there is the sum of all of the in any row and the joint is essentially what that value is. The conditional then becomes nothing but tell me this value only as a proportion of these values.
So this blue fellow is denoted as PR bracket x by y1.
This one, yes, PR x by y1, correct.
Secondly,
X by y2.
You should have given those capitals.
Yes, I
Thank you for pointing it out. Next version of the presentation that will be there.
I don't want to make any sense.
No. By the way, your feedback is what has made me do these examples in this way, and I'm hoping it's getting everybody's doubts cleared here. So you can see, I can say probability of x2 by y2 is 0.1 divided by all those, then this thing divided y2 by x2 is this. So what it means is, tell me the proportion of this among these values. Okay? So that is the denominator, the second one. Or you tell me this in proportion of these values. Those are the only two possibilities, right? I can either give you the x or the y. So I can either look at the proportion of this way, or I can look at the proportion of it this way. Okay?
Now, this will take us, okay, now as I said, change of notation. I'm sorry about this, but that's how, because I'm taking slides from different places. But you will understand, if I have now three variables, x1, I'm not doing x and y, because I can have many variables when I go to my next section. So I'm saying, let's say x1 is one variable, x2 is another, x3 is another. And the way I will separate them into buckets is, let's say x1 has 4 buckets. I will say x1 is equal to 1, x1 is equal to 2, x1 is equal to 3, x1 is equal to 4. Those are the 4 buckets for x1. Then there are some 3 buckets for x2 and so on. Okay? So if I give you the joint, let's say I give you this x1, x2, this is the joint distribution, x1, x3, x2, x3, right? Now, if you wanted to find the conditional using that formula, suppose you wanted to do probability of x2 given x1, you will simply, for this column, you will divide everything by 0.33. This you divide by 0.15, by 0.26, by 0.26, you'll get this. Right? So you can go from joint. Those will be called the marginals now, because in the context of x1 and x2, this is a marginal because I took away one of the variables. Okay? So when you have fewer variables, that means you have marginalized something. And you can do the calculations here. And that's all that I did. I simply took x1, x3. If you want x3 given x1, then I simply divided them by 0.33, by 0.15. So this one by 0.33, this one by 0.33, this by 0.15, by 0.15, and so on. I simply divided them. Got this. You can go back and forth. Okay, now this I think is the eureka moment, where we will say, is this all that Bayes' rule was? Because we remembered that x given y, that means if I give you the y, find me this x as a proportion of this is x given y. So PRY is sum of all of these. That's sum of all of these. This is how is this proportion among this. That will give me the joint. That same joint I can also get by saying sum up all of these and tell me how this is distributed, proportion among this, right? And that's this side of the equation. Both of them are x comma y. I can arrive at x comma y either by saying x given y times py or y given x times x. All that you are saying is, here you are saying x is given, that means I have given you the column. Tell me the probability. So look at how the notation is, by the way. We are saying in our head, capital X is equal to x2, that is given. Capital Y is equal to y2, that is this. So tell me how is this among all of these.
So this is 0.1 divided by 0.2, which is 0.5. Okay? So that's what that is. So the sum here is 0.2. This was 0.5, you multiply it, you'll get it back. So I can either do it like this, or I can do it like this. So you will see that both of them give you the joint.
So Bayes' rule is actually nothing but
both of them are actually equal to x comma y, so these two are equal. So if you look at my calculations here, probability of y2, that means this particular row is 0.15 plus 0.1 plus 0.25 plus 0.1.
Incidentally,
Yes.
all the numbers inside the blacks rectangle
Yes.
should be 1.
Yes.
It should be 0.95.
Oh, see, I told you I made a mistake then. So let's say 25, 35, 40, then 25, 30, 40. Yeah, it's actually more, huh?
No, 0.95.
0.95. So it's
that's more in fact.
It's 1.05.
0.5.
Yeah. So I have made a mistake.
Some numbers.
No, 1.05.
So this is 25, 35 and 40. So this is 0.4. This is 25, 30 and 40. This is 0.4. This one is 0.25. It should be 0.2 to make it add to 1. I think I made a mistake here. Somewhere back I was looking at this is 0.35.
So that is to make it quite good.
Yeah. See, I have just added. I took the picture of the boxes and I put numbers inside.
Yeah.
But everybody is getting the idea, right? Thank you for pointing this out, because when we distribute the slides, we'll fix these errors. But all that we are saying here is, I took PRY2 means I summed that up. That is this. And then I told you what is this as a proportion of that. So 0.1 divided by that, that's 0.25. Okay. Now, if you wanted, and so basically you can get one from the other. So if you multiply those two, you'll get it back. If you do it the other way, that means I look at this column. So 0.05 plus 0.1 plus 0.05. 0.1 divided by that is 0.5. And you can just do the same. So what we realized is this particular, you could arrive at this value if I give you this marginal and I gave you the conditional, that means what is its proportion among those. If I gave you those two quantities, or I gave you this marginal and I said what is this proportion among this. Both ways you can arrive at this. So whether you go row wise or column wise, they are both equal, and that's the Bayes rule.
Now, this going back to the question I think was raised last time. So mathematically, that is all that there is. That I have two variables, and if I give you marginal and conditional along this way or this way, they will come back to be the same. Now, in machine learning and pattern recognition and in application, we are going to give this different names. We will say X is your data measurement. Y is the class that you want to find out. Okay? That's how we are going to take this and put it over there. Then, the marginal is called the evidence, if it is on X, and the marginal on the class is called the prior. Prior. So, because if I have three variables, three possibilities for the bucket Y, if I tell you ahead of time that this is 0.4, 0.4 and point whatever, so that is the marginal. If I gave you this here, so how this thing, that is the evidence. Okay. So some of those are going to be estimated, some will be measured, so then the whole pattern recognition, machine learning, and how you use the Bayes theorem will come in. But by simple formula, it's essentially joint probability, and whether you are looking at it column wise or row wise. So now we can introduce these terms, but we know that these are just terms put onto that simple math we just did. So prior is the marginal of those rows, evidence would be the marginals of the columns, likelihood is the conditional probability given a particular class. So if I have told you that this is my class, what is the likelihood of seeing the data value x is equal to x2?
That's called likelihood. If I do it the other way, then it's called a posterior. That means if I tell you that x is equal to x2, I have measured it and have seen it. Okay. Now you tell me what is the probability of y2 having seen that x. That means having given you this column, I am giving it to you. That is called the posterior. So the labels of posterior, prior, evidence and likelihood are our application terms. But what is coming is essentially the simple looking at two variables from either rows or columns, or either giving you one, finding the other, vice versa.
These sort of things have been mentioned in Common Bayes rule chapter.
See, I'll tell you, somebody told me, nobody has been, no book I have seen has explained this.
Correct. I appreciate it.
So, and I thank you for bringing this out through me. So we are all part of this Eureka moment. So now,
the last one, world class.
okay, world class means you pattern recognition. Sometimes whatever the labels in the world, so whatever you're trying to predict. So they are also called, by the way, in machine learning, hidden variables. That means it is something which you cannot directly measure. You measure the x's and you figure out the y, right? So it's called a hidden variable or latent variable. All these are terms used. World label, latent variable, hidden. All are for y. And what you measure is x. Now, if you recall from the session previously, we kind of rushed at the end. But we said there are two types of models. One is called discriminative model, one is called generative model. And you can go one from the other. We showed that. And we'll come back to those lessons again if we need more sessions. But that is all that we were doing. In discriminative model, what you say is, I will come up with a way of modeling this joint by modeling 4 different columns. Okay? That means I will come up with a way that you tell me the column number and I will tell you how the distribution is. If you can do that modeling, that's the discriminative model. On the other hand, if you say you tell me the prior and I will tell you how the x is distributed, that's the generative model. So if you come up with a model where I can model these 3 distributions given the y value, right? Then that is called generative. If you do it the other way, it's called discriminative. And in your head, you see it's the same thing, because if you give me these 4 columns, I can put them together and I can get the joint, and then I can cut this way and get you the rows. Or you give me the rows, I put them together, get the joint, and what do we mean by getting the joint? Well, simply multiply with the marginals, right?
Now a question about the jogger. What is that we are discriminating here? Why it is called discriminative? And what are we generating over here?
Okay, good question. These are terms that are being used in the literature.
Historically.
No, people have started using these, but I'll tell you what is their logic behind that. In the discriminative model, if you give me x, usually you will go and measure something, right? Once I measure, I say, okay, my x value is here. I'm immediately able to give you the y distribution. That's what you're looking for.
Yes.
So it's coming to you right away.
It's classification.
Yes, so it's called discriminative. That means as soon as I give you x, I can tell you how the y is distributed. That's
Or I will say that out of the very many x's you have chosen x1.
correct. So once you have okay, that could also be the thing.
So how it is a given sample belongs to a class.
Yeah, that's a pattern recognition is essentially this. It means I gave you the x, you tell me the y, and we don't tell you the single y. We tell you, okay, if this is x, then there is so much probability that y is this much, so much probability that y is this much, so much is this much. And now if you go for the maximum, then it will you pick the maximum value and so on. Now generative is also interesting because now you can generate data. Suppose I tell you that, suppose you came up with a model, okay? So if I give you some y value here, let's say this was continuous. I gave you this y value here. You are able to tell me how x is distributed there. So this is data, these are measurements which you never measured, but I'm telling you according to this model, that is how the x will be. That's the likelihood of x. That means x having this value is so much probability, this is so much probability, this is so much probability. So you are able to generate data. Okay, this is but more used historically. But what we understood from last time was you can go between the two. Okay, this is giving you immediately the answers. Here you will have to multiply. So you take the likelihood, then you multiply it with the prior and get the posterior.
Why don't you write a tutorial using Tom Mitchell's example, say 59, that day 1 to day 14, using this sort of concept, the same thing, entropy gain and all that.
No, I will look at it. I haven't looked at his thing, Mitchell's, but I'll take a look. Because now the more popular books are Bishop's.
No, he didn't get example.
Yes.
That's why
Somebody else. Yes.
But you are probably
Good.
Asking Kishida.
We'll make it an idea-related product on the web.
no.
Tutorial. No, that will be good. So it will be like
A tutorial like this in IIT Hyderabad has something.
Yeah.
Okay. So now the labels are simply joint is conditional times marginal, and these labels are what we have understood already. Okay. So in our head we know it's nothing but a joint distribution, and you go in this column-wise or group-wise. Okay. So this is from last time.
You say that this idea is yours and they're not published anywhere.
no, idea means nothing is fantastic, but just looking at it like this, I haven't seen it.
We are looking.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so I also not seen. He's also declaring.
So yes, I think it's a good tutorial that we can.
But he said, is this the idea you were thinking?
Just because I prepared this session.
Oh, then
That's what I'm saying. I didn't know it either. When I was putting together, I did not know honestly, and I was just doing it mechanically. Oh, like you multiply, divide, normalize, boom.
Tomorrow I didn't know.
So what happened is when last time when I prepared this, while going through this, I said, oh, and then I showed it to my students, and they all loved it. They said, we have not been taught in 20 years. I was just thinking.
It's better to give a discussion for the same examples so that these are people.
I'll prepare and then maybe for next session I'll show you a snapshot of that. So now this is all that we covered so far is just revising what we studied in the first session. We tried to clear up the notation, we tried to clear up some of that jargon, and hopefully we now understand the joint and conditionals. Conditional, marginal, joint, we understood those.
Now I started looking at probabilistic graphical models.
This was supposed to be session 3, but then after revising these probability things, I realized it's a natural thing to just move along this line, come back to neural networks and SVMs later, because that's a different way of looking at things, right? So let me continue. These are examples I have made. So by the way, if there are mistakes like you saw and the additions and so on, please let me know that we'll fix it. But I said, okay, now suppose you have many variables, not just 1, 2, 3 or 4, many variables, right? How do we go about doing these things? I picked up an example. I said, made this example saying, let's say I have 3 random variables, A, B and C. Each of those variables has 3 buckets or 3 options, 3 outcomes. So you have a possible cube like this, okay? A can take a value just 0, 1 or 2, B can take 0, 1 or 2, which means something else. In real life that could mean income between this much and this much, or loan or some stock value, it can mean anything, okay? We also know now that the conditional distributions are going to be a dimension less than the joint, right? Because conditional is either just a column from a 2-dimensional square or just a row from a 2-dimensional. So the conditional distributions are going to be at a lower dimension. Now if I wanted to go to this place in the middle where the value of A is 1, B is 1 and C is 1, and I say what is the probability, the joint probability of P, A is equal to 1, comma, B is equal to 1, comma, C is equal to 1. Then you, based extending what we just saw, you can do the following. You will say, well, we can say this is nothing but reaching at that point, right? So I could first choose the plane A comma B. That means I choose one of those planes, right? That's a marginalization, right? So I don't care about C, I just choose one of those. Once I've chosen those, then within that plane I figure out what is the probability of C. I just extended it by one dimension. Instead of 2 variables, I've gone to 3 variables. And then you say P A comma B is multiplied with that because there are 3 planes
Joint.
that is joint. So then this is just a simple extension of from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. And then this you can write A comma B from before we know how to write is B given A times B. So now we have seen what we can do with many variables. We can simply say I will choose, take away one of the variables, choose without that variable, find the probability of that plane or whatever that hyper thing is, and then within that you go and find that variable. And you can keep doing it at many levels.
Now what is the interesting part here is,
I could have arrived at the same answer through a different path. I could have said choose this or this first. Similarly, like rows to columns, columns to rows, you can in your head say, well, it can go to any number of dimensions.
actually you can do it in 6 different ways, probably A, B, C. So you take first this, then that, and so on. The 6 different ways of arranging A, B, and C.
Only three.
Because permutation doesn't matter here.
Okay.
It's only combination.
Only three.
Because A, B or B is going to be the same.
Yeah.
6 permutations but 3 combinations. So we end up with 3 probabilities.
Yeah.
P,
Yeah.
C of A given B, A comma B or B comma A is one and the same. Right?
A comma B.
Or B comma A.
No, A comma B comma is, but A comma B, I could then again do it in 2 different ways, right? So B given A.
A comma C. A comma C.
There are 6 different.
So there are 6 different ways of.
All the 6.
I have another slide to show that. So now if you go to,
Let's say 30 variables, 50 variables, some k, you know now how to do. All that you are doing is reaching that point by choosing, lower dimension, then this finally going to that point. Now I want to write it mechanically. Obviously every time I don't want to do this in my head. So I say choose the first variable, x1. Now I moved away from ABC. x1, then you say x1 given x2, and then so on and so on. You keep doing it till you reach the last one. Right? So when I come to xk, all the previous variables that whatever that hyperdimension is, I must have figured out. Because there will be many such. I chose one of them, and in that I went and found the xk.
Wait. It says the only k possibility, that means 3. Xk by xk, which means only k possibilities, which means ABC. 3.
No, I'm saying if there are k variables.
Agreed, ABC.
Yeah.
It is generalization of
Yes.
the middle equation, isn't it?
Oh, you mean the way I have written it? Yeah.
So,
Okay, that's
ABC,
possible.
K, so k equal to 3, that is only 3. I mean, 3 more, not 6.
No, 6 are there.
Where? Here.
It is for the last one, the previous.
No, these you can flip these, right?
No. There I understand we got 6.
Yeah.
A by B.
So this will be factorial
K
k.
factorial.
K factorial numbers are
I
possible.
agree, but this generalized formula.
Is one of those K factorial.
Yes.
One particular way of writing. So you could go any of them. I'm just showing that if you had K variables, you would do this. Now,
This is the new concept for today's lecture. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but the new thing we are going to introduce today is very interesting.
But I mean, just can you go back?
Yeah.
See, if only you fix xk as y, let us say, then everything possibly makes more sense to some other people who are sitting over here, because then it is translates into a classification problem.
Yeah, but I don't want to do that.
I'm doing immediately, I know.
Yeah.
But then people can relate that.
Right. I want everybody to think only as a joint of many variables. In pattern recognition, the y is the class, world class or latent or hidden variable, and the x is the measurement, and you can call prior and evidence and likelihood and posterior. Those are just labels. Today we are only looking at just whole bunch of variables looked at together. Okay? But yes, when we talk about yes, and when we come to classification, which is another session that we should be doing, then we can bring that in. Okay? Today, just think about how you have k variables. I'm looking at the joint. I want to find the joint somewhere in that hyper thing, and what will be the problem? Okay? And we understood it very nicely for 2 dimensions. Now we just imagine that, okay, this is going to work for k dimensions. Okay?
There's some simple question, I mean, it might be deviation on the topic. Like, how does Bayes rule collapse when some of these events tend to be independent?
I'm coming to independence. That's the next slide. This is the next slide. So, joint probability of x1 and x2. We know this, we just proved this. If there are 2 variables x1 comma x2, it's x1 given x2 times PR x2, or you write it the other way, x2 given x1. We know all of this. Now if I tell you that x1 and x2 are actually independent, what does it mean? That means if I tell you the particular bucket you are in, it does not add any information. Okay, what does that mean? What it means is that there are 4 column buckets. I tell you which bucket I have chosen. It gives me no new information on how a particular value is proportioned within that bucket. That means they are all the same. Not exactly same values. The proportions are the same. That's very important to understand. That means whether I choose bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3 or bucket 4, the particular person's income bracket within any one bucket is the same percentage. It's not the same value. Okay? If that happens, then I can say that 2 are independent because you telling me which bucket is giving me no new information.
That is, the distribution of terms across 2 different rows will be the same.
Yes. If they are independent, so yeah, we'll develop
The
that.
distribution of terms will be the same.
Yes, distribution is the same. That means the proportion that this is so much more than this or less than this. That profile is maintained. Just the values could be different. Now, if x2 given x1 is nothing but just x2 because x1 did not give me any information. So I could just write that as probability of x2. Similarly, if x1 and x2 are independent, you telling me what the value of x2 does not do anything for me, that's essentially PR of x1. So if x1 and x2 are independent, I can write this, which if I substitute, comes to that you simply multiply. If 2 variables, those are independent, then the joint is nothing but simple multiplication of the values. Yes. Okay. Now we go back to our example and see how this plays out. Let's look at 3 variables x1, x2, x3. X is conditionally independent of x3 given x2. Now I am developing a new concept here. So we talked about independence. Keep that aside. Now we are coming to conditional independence. What it means is, if I have 3 variables, if I give you one of them, so what does it mean? I had the cube. If I told you which plane it is, I told you, within that plane, the other 2 variables are independent. That is easily multiplied. As a whole, they are not. But if I tell you the plane, in each of those planes, the independence is established, and you can simply multiply the margins to get the joint for each plane. Or if it is independent given a particular column like this, then within that plane, the independence is maintained. If that is the scenario, it's called okay. So we'll see how this works in an example. x1 is conditionally independent of x3 given x2 when x1 and x3 are independent for a fixed x2. Then the joint density factorizes as follows. So this part we already know, the top line, we already saw this. You take the probability of the first one, the second one given the first, given those two, the third. Just going to that point in the key. Now if this thing holds, that means x1 and x3 are independent given x2, then this particular term here, I can just reduce it to this because x3 given x2 comma x1 is just x3 given x2 because this is buying me no new information. Okay? You telling me what bucket it is doesn't add anything. I already, from what I know, I can find it out. So now you have an interesting reduction of the formula. If conditional independence is there, then you'll see that some of those terms are becoming simpler. Right? x3 given x2 comma x1 is nothing but x3 given x2 because I have already told you that x3 and x1 are independent when you give me x2. Okay? So we'll work this out in an example. Okay, I tried this. By the way, I have requested Maitre and I request you that I want to take these mathematical things and put them with finance and banking examples. And I had some difficulty of making this up because this is not my domain. So maybe a student can be assigned, take the presentation and make some nice realistic examples to go with them. I have tried one example here, so please forgive me if the example doesn't sound realistic, but this is how I said. Suppose I have two companies A and B. Okay? So the state of each of these companies is a random variable. And let's say it's binary, that means it can take two values. The company can be vibrant, doing extremely well, or the company is going to bankrupt, default. Okay? These are the two possibilities. Okay? So suppose I write it like this. Defaulting company, vibrant, these are the two possibilities. Similarly for firm B. Let's say these are the two variables I have. Now, let's say there is an event x, another random variable x, which is nothing but the state of a business cycle. And you can have growth, recovery, recession, trough, 5 different possibilities. So, x is a random variable with 5 buckets.
Discrete.
Yes, I'm only looking discrete. You can see how it can be taken to continuous domain. Okay? And I have two variables a and b, which have 2 possibilities, 2 buckets each. Now, I tell you that A and B are independent. That is, what happens in A and what happens in B, they are independent if I tell you what X is. So, given that X is in recession, if I tell you it's in recession, then I'm telling you A and B are independent. Or if X is in, whatever, peak growth, the other two are. So, this I will represent as follows. Now we are getting into the graphical models. I will take for each random variable a node. That's why it's probabilistic, okay? Because I am looking at only random variables. A and B, and I'll draw it like that. What it means is, you can see there is no connection between A and B. If I give you the value of X, A and B are independent. Okay? So, P of A comma B, the joint probability of A and B given X is nothing but probability of A given X, probability of B given X, because they are independent once X is given. Remember, once X is given, straight multiplication. Now, let's look at this example. Going back to our squares in a box, you all know what it means. Now I have 3 variables, x1, x2. This is the joint distribution of x1 and x2. I have another variable called x3 which has 2 values. So x1, x2 joint when x3 is this value, and x1, x2 joint when x3 is the other value. Okay? So let's say x3 is 0, this is the plane, x3 is equal to 1, this is the plane. And these squares are telling you what the values are in proportion. Now, if you look at the joint distribution, I take any two variables, x1, x2, x1, x3 or x2, x3. I will get things like this, right? x1, x2 means no x3 means I will take this and just add them. Means add this to this, add this to this, this to this. Okay? Then you will get these three values. Similarly, you add these two, you get this value. You add these two, you get this value. That's what you did. You took away the distribution along the x dimension. Remember marginalization? You eliminated one variable by adding everything along that dimension. So you simply took these two, added up, you got this. Now x1, x3.
But that adding is marginal.
Yeah, by you eliminated one of the variables. So see, you had also along the buckets of x3 distributions, you took all of them and put them back here. So x3 is not a variable. Similarly, you can do x1 and x3.
That what is the legend for fig B?
What is that?
Legend
Oh no,
for fig B.
forget this. This is because I copied it from the book.
Okay. You know what is the...
Oh, this is joint probability of x1, x2.
X1,
x1, x2. So if x3 variable was not there, what would you do? You will take these two, add them and make that. If x1, x2 is not there, that means I don't have this depth here, then I will simply take all of them and add like this. Okay, then I will get that x1, x3, and you can get x2, x3 means I add everything like this. So I simply got this plane with everything. Now you look at the squares in each of those. Would you say any of those are independent? Is x1 independent of x2? How would you decide?
If the proportion is changed, then
So you say, suppose I told you which one was x1, am I getting new information? Yes. So you see, here in this column, this is much bigger, whereas this is not as big as compared to these. Right? This is lower. In fact, here this is bigger than that. So if I give you which column it is, I am giving you new information. And it's symmetric. So if you look here, in this is the biggest, in this is the biggest. So if I tell you which row it is, I am giving you new information. That means these two cannot be independent. You agree? Similarly, x1 and x3 cannot be independent. You can verify that here, this one is bigger than this, here, this one is equal to this. So whether you look this way or that way, if I look at a row, or if I tell you which row it is, I am giving you new information. If I tell you which column it is, I give you new. Same thing with the last one.
very intuitive.
Intuitive, right? So now you see that none of those variable pairs are independent. But now if I do the following, so marginal distributions show no pair is independent. If I tell you x1, x2, that means, see x2 is equal to 1, x2 is equal to 2, x2 is equal to 3, right? So if I tell you x2 is equal to 1 means look at the plane closest to you. That means this row and this row. Okay? That's this. Then the next one is the one in the middle. That means this one and this one. That's here. And the last one is this one and this one. So this is the x1, x3 given the x2 value. So on. Now look at those sizes. Do you think they are independent? Yes. Because this is much bigger than this. Looks like this is the same proportion bigger than this, this and this. You go this way, same thing. You look at those boxes, you will see that the proportions are maintained whether you go row or column. If I give you the row, I am giving you no new information. Okay? So this is a good conditional independence example. Right? If you just look at the pairs, not independent. I tell you one of those variables given, they are all independent. Okay? Now, I made up this example now. So we'll start with actual numbers. So you have x1, x2, x3. I tell you the joint of x1, x2, x2, x3, and x1, x3, and x2, x3. Now, from the example we are saying x1 and x3 are independent given x2. So what are you doing? What you are doing is, now we are going back, so we have the marginal, we are going to distribute it more. So I already have this. Question is, can you distribute these values into 3 pieces so that the independence in each of those pieces is somehow coming through? Okay, so play with the proportions and take this thing and divide it among them.
Now, I did this, of course, my student did the calculations here, and he said,
this will work. So here if you look, this is 9 times this, 9 times this, 9 times this, 9 times this. If I look at this way, 4 times this, 4 times this, and so on. You look at this table, again, you can see what the differences are. So this is like about 2/3 of this, 2/3 of this. You look at the last table, same.
But if you extend this to one more level, studying, trying to find what is P of not x1, x2, but P of x1, x2, x3.
Yeah.
So will that be a scaling factor difference will be there because I'm entering a round plane and each plane is divided by a...
Okay, you're jumping ahead on my slides.
so what I'm showing here is that, remember I showed you in that formula, I said once you gave me independence, some of the terms became simpler. Right? Because we're able to eliminate some variables and say it doesn't need it. So I'm going to build this case now. So okay, before I go to that, I have some more insight to share with you. So we already did this, right? They are all independent. Now, if I go back to the marginals,
I simply added these, it's 0.1. You add these, it's 0.9. Okay? Similarly, you add these, it's 0.7, this is 0.3, 0.2 and 0.8. Okay? Now remember, if they are independent, you can simply multiply to get the joint. Now try it out. You multiply these two, it will be 0.09. You multiply these two, it will be 0.01. So you will get that table just by multiplying the values of the marginals. Straight multiplication. Because they are independent. Okay? So I can say 0.3 times 0.7 will get 0.21, 0.2 times 0.7 will get 0.4, and so on. So this is to convince ourselves that yes, independence means 2 things. I can multiply to get the marginals, and if I look at the distribution, the row and column proportions will be maintained. I have no additional information if you give me the column or the row. Okay? So those are the 2 insights today.
now I just went overboard. I said, okay, let me show it to you with the bar charts. Okay, we already did it with the squares. So if I have x1, x2, x3, that's the distribution. Now those are the joints.
So if you look at the joint, the proportions are all different. You can see here, this is the tallest, here this is the tallest, here something else, this is the tallest. If you look at this way or this way, it's all mixed up. You look at any of those, the red, blue, green, if you look at it within a row, or which row, the proportions will be different.
Now if you do the conditional independence, now look at the charts.
They are all proportionate. That means if the red is the smallest here and is growing like that, the blue is also growing like that. And if you see, this is the tallest, this is the tallest among the blues. Okay? It's the same thing. Instead of showing it to you in squares, I'm showing it to you with the plot.
Okay? Now, we come to what is called graphical models. How am I doing time? Is everybody okay? Okay, no? Take a little bit more than that. Okay? Okay, by 1 o'clock. What's the time now? 4:20, yeah. So within half an hour I should have. Okay, graphical models. So graph-based joint distribution representation. We will make explicit the factorization and the conditional independence relations.
So remember, when we were doing the factors, that means I had x1, x2, x3, x4, x5 up to xk, you broke that into factors, right? And then when I said if you give me conditional independence, some of those terms will become smaller and easier. Okay? So how can I look at a graph and give you the factors, or you take the factors, give me the graph? Okay, that's the thing. There are two important types, and this will set the stage for next session. The first is called directed graph. We all know graph theory, right? If you put arrows, it becomes directed. If there are no arrows, it's undirected. When you have directed graphs, they are called Bayesian networks. So you will see terms like, oh, I'm using Bayes nets. All that they are doing is simply what I'm going to show you now. They have these nodes and they have put arrows, and then they have done the factors. If you don't put arrows, they are called Markov networks. Now there is some confusion even among these things, because I'll show you HMM, there will be arrows, but then we call it a Markov model. Okay? So there are people are using these terms loosely and in mixed up way. But by definition from the book, a directed graph model is what is a Bayesian network, and an undirected model is a Markov. This is Bishop's book. This is standard. They all accept that some of the terms from before have kept in which don't adhere to this level. Now let me go back to the example we did before. Remember the cube example we did? A, B, C, and somebody said, show me the 6 ways. So I wrote the 6 ways are possible. See? So you can keep permuting them. Because you see the order, right? There are 3 variables. You can arrange them in 6 ways. So now, suppose I tell you the following. I told you can choose any of those 6 ways to go to that point. But now when I draw it in a graph, I will say that you can only go this way, you cannot come this way. And suppose I put all those conditions now, because if you have a graph with arrows, you can only go in particular directions. So what is that going to do to our factors? Okay, that's the question. Now, why would you even do it? Somebody can ask. Why do you want to put arrows? Well, we all want to solve real world examples using all of this math, right? So somebody will come, an expert will come and say, you know, in banking, this is caused by this, that I have a variable which I am representing, let's say the business cycle, that causes whether a company will declare bankruptcy or do well or not. It's not the other way, suppose they say. So they are telling me that one causes the other, then it makes intuitive sense to say that there are 2 nodes, both are random variables, but I will put an arrow from one going to the other. Okay? So my word knowledge of the application will tell me how the arrows should flow. Okay? Now if I have these arrows flowing, then clearly there won't be 6 ways, there won't be 7, because I am telling you, you can't go in certain directions. So many of these factors will go away. Some of the factors will stay. Now, so this is Bayes networks. I'm giving one example. Suppose I have 3 variables A, B, C. I have arrows as I have shown you. Then if I ask you for the factors, you will give me that factors, right? You will say probability of A, B given A, C given A, comma B. Right? Because from C gets arrows both from A and B. Agree? Now if I change the direction of the arrows, you will give me a different factors. Okay? Now if I took away one of those edges, I took out one of those edges, what I am telling you is actually those B and C are independent if I give you A. Then you will take those factors and you will simplify it, remember, like the way we saw. So if I give you independence, I get simpler factors. I give you arrows, some particular ordering will work, others won't work. Okay, we understand that much. Now you can take this to many variables. Okay,
So I want a mechanical way of doing this. I don't want to keep checking things, I just want to do it mechanically. So the way you do it mechanically is as follows. You simply say, you take a variable x1, okay, then nothing is coming into it, x2, nothing is coming into it, x3, nothing coming, x4, nothing is, x4's 3 arrows are coming, so x4 given x1, x2, x3, x5, 2 arrows are coming from 1 and 3, so you write it like that, 6. So what you do is, for every variable, you see if nothing is coming into it, you simply write it, and if some arrows are coming into it, you say given those variables. Now since obviously you don't have 7 times, whatever, 7 times 6, 42 different edges here, so some of them are valid, some are not, so obviously the number of factors I have is much simpler, okay? If I had 7 variables, the joint will be like, in 42 different dimensions, right? But I have got a much simpler thing for the following reasons. One, I'm giving you only some directions are allowed, and some are not even connected, okay? So the formula is simply this, okay? Very straightforward. Parent. So parent, sorry, yeah. So I'll explain it. So xk given its parents. So x4 given its parents 1, 2 and 3. So x4 has 3 parents, 2, 1, 3. So that notation PA means the parents of that notation. Okay? Now, so I give you a much more complicated graph, and then you say, well, I know how to do this. I will take each variable and keep multiplying, and always say the condition is given its parents. Okay? And if no parents, then just put the node in. So you can give me this formula. Agreed? I have so many variables, connections are given, you will be able to write this formula. Correct? Now if I give you the formula, you should be able to go back. There are arrows. I will fix that in the next question. Yeah, I mean, if you can't see bigger. Okay. Now if I give you this formula, you can also construct the graph. You can simply say, add one node per random variable and draw arrow to each variable from each of its parents. So I could just go to that. So I can say x11 and I'll put 2 arrows from x7 and x8 into it. So I can just come back to the graph from this. Now, these are directed graph models or Bayesian networks. You know the formula now? And now I can say, if I give you that particular graph, you know from the formula that we just saw, you can write it in a simple form like this, which is taking into account the fact that x1 and x3 are actually independent given x2. We have taken that into account in the way we are mechanically writing these factors. Okay. Now if you go back to the example over there, x1, x2 and x3, remember the joint distribution with those blocks. So, we can figure out, suppose there is a conditional independence thing, then, that given one plane, within that plane, the proportions are maintained. There is also this notion called Markov blanket. Okay? The definition is that you take the variable and all its parents, children, and parents of children are included. So if I am looking at x8, x4 and x5 are its parents, x11, x12 are its children, and x7 parents of children. So this is a child of x8, its parent is also included. That's called the Markov blanket. So for every node, you can have a Markov blanket. Okay?
How does it?
It helps, I'm not going to do it theory, but given the Markov blanket, you can tell which ones are conditionally independent. So if x8 is independent of x3 given the Markov blanket, x8 is independent of x13 given the Markov blanket, x8 is independent of x9 given the Markov blanket.
So if I give you x8 is independent of everything outside this blanket given that blanket. So there, like we were doing, right? x3 is independent of x1 given x2. So I'm saying if you give me these fixed t's, then this is going to be independent of everything outside. There are
So for a
proofs.
given application, Markov blanket need not exist, right?
Yeah.
Need not exist.
Now independence, so if no root exists between two variables and they share no ancestors, they are independent. Which one? So
Yes, we unconnected.
this is
Outside.
it's independent of, right? There's no root to it from anything, so it's independent of all of that. Okay. So independent x1, x2, x6 and x15. There is no root from x6 to x15.
And there is no root from x1 to x2. See, x2, you go into it, there is no way to go from x1 to x2. So they are going to be independent.
So the graphs are essentially a good way for you to take your word application and write it as a graph, saying recession is a business cycle drives this, put an arrow. This thing does this. So you write all your knowledge as a graph. Then you take it into factors. Then it automatically takes care of all the conditional independence. And conditional independence is critical to reduce the factors and make them simpler. And why is that important?
X15 is independent.
X6. So okay, so X6 and X15. Can you get to X15 from X6? You can't. You can only go this way. That's it.
Oh, yes.
In base. In base.
Oh, yes. 6 and X base.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then I have a kind of similarity. This pretty much looks like the fuzzy cognitive map. There was a similar kind of logic is there. There also we put the variables, put them in the nodes, and we also give them connections. But those connections are determined just like the neural network connection. There is an algorithm for that.
Maybe we can do some work.
X2, X6 are also independent.
Yeah, no, I'm just giving some examples. Just you can work that. Many more.
Yeah, many more.
So conditional independence, a variable is conditionally independent of all others given its Markov blanket. Okay. Then there are some theorems from graph theory. I'm going to kind of gloss over that right now. All it is telling you is when you look at the graph, how do you find out which two are independent? We can just go with the simple formula. Okay. So now I want to come to the last concept before we show you XML. And that is that we have already established redundancy, right? We already said that x1, x2, x3, I'm giving you easier factors if you give me this graph. If you tell me x1 causes x2, x2 causes x3, I also know from my concept right now that that means x1 and x3 are actually independent given x2. I get this kind of a formula. This has fewer terms than if I did not give you this and I did the whole thing. So if you look at the whole thing, x1
I got it out. X1 and X3 are independent.
given x2.
Given X2. Okay. X2 depends upon X3 depends upon X2, but X2 depends upon X1.
Yeah. So if I give it to you, then these two are independent.
You are not doing actual information.
Oh, given X2, they are independent.
So now if I look at this, remember that box on the side, how many entries were there? Remember 12 but 2 layers, so 24 entries. Okay, 4 times 3 times 2. Now, if I give you this redundancy, actually I will need fewer number of entries. I can give you x1, I can give you the x2 given x1, I can give you the x3 given x2, those are only 22, 4 plus 12 plus 6, and I should be able to reconstruct. If you give, I can actually give you all the 24 back. What will I use? I will use that idea that the proportions will be maintained along the ones where they are independent, and so given that one plane, I will be able to give you the other planes using those constraints. So conditional independence gives me redundancy, and efficiency. Now, this is part of the next session. I'm just touching upon it. Undirected graph models we will do in the next session. Okay? So let me just move through this. So if I don't put arrows, then how do you do independence and so on. By the way, both are possible. There are some concepts which you can represent only with directed graphs. There are some concepts you can represent only with undirected. There are some which both can do. Okay? So it depends on your application. Okay, so when we talk about undirected graphs, it will be Markov random fields, conditional random fields, how they are used. Those applications, there are some where both can be used. You can use a directed Bayesian network, or you can use Markov random field. Both are fine. So this chart shows that some can be done by both, some by only one or the other. Here are examples. This is how they write it, by the way. x2 is independent of x1 given x3. That's the symbol.
Why one? The particular would have been also all the independent.
So this is what is being used, but unfortunately I cannot get the symbol on my Mac, this thing.
Yeah.
So I was not able to recreate, so it's just cut and paste PDF from the book. So this graph, okay, based on what we just saw, represents this. The same thing can also, without putting arrows also, I can get that. This one, x2 given x1, this, there is no way to represent this without the arrows. Both models represent same independence and conditional independence relations, and undirected graph models cannot describe this. Okay? So this just to show you that there are different ways of doing these models. Okay, we won't go into too much of detail in this. Here is again, you can say comparing directed and undirected. On the left side, it is undirected. So x1 is independent of x4 if you give me x2 and x3. If you give me these two values, then these two are independent. If you give me these two values, these two are independent. In this case, x1 and x4 are independent given x2, x3. x2 and x3 are independent given x1.
No, on the left hand side, you can draw some more x1, x2, x3, x4 also. I mean, you can say x3 is independent of.
Without arrows, does it mean it is bidirectional?
Yes, yes, it's like they're connected.
Yeah.
So I didn't go into the definitions of undirected, which I want to cover in the next class.
No, my point is, why did you stop only x1, x2? We can x1, x2, x3, x4 also. It applies.
Yeah, so you can go x1 and x2. No, x1 and x2 cannot be independent, they have a direct connected edge.
Yeah.
Only if you don't have a directly connected edge, you have to go through something else to have that notion. Okay, let's come to the agenda. We'll cover this again with a little more theory in the undirected session. Okay? Now, let us say we have a model like this. In my head, I say these are my world states or the hidden labels, something I cannot directly measure. So maybe, for example, business cycle. The variable is it in recession, is it in peak, is it in growth? All those possibilities exist for this variable. And I can measure people's income, loan defaults, I can measure salary rises and so on. Okay, so the measurements are X, the world state is W. And I can do this many times. Let's say I do this in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. Okay, so there is a time series. Okay, if I want to represent that series, you will say yes, the state in 2005 is going to drive the state in 2006, right? If I am already in recession, I probably won't jump immediately to booming economy. I'll probably more probability to go to the next stage and so on. And I can measure, this measurement has nothing to do with the measurements I make the next. Given this, these two are independent. Given the state that I'm in, I have no connection between these. So I can represent such applications by a graphical model like this. This is called a chain model. This is the hidden Markov model. When people say hidden Markov model, this is what they're showing.
That means if this is a pattern class, suppose you're doing classification, this will be my image features. These are A to Z. Is it A, is it B, is it C, is it D? Okay. Then if this is a word, then in the first position of the word, I find the character. Then the next position I find the character. Next. If I'm doing very good segmentation, then the features I extract from the first character has nothing to do with the features I extract in the second character. Okay? So this is a hidden Markov model.
But what is hidden here? Why is it?
Okay, very good question. First of all, we are calling it Markov, although we have arrows. Okay? This is technically a Bayesian network. Now, because of historical reasons, this was called a hidden Markov model because they said, well, these labels are hidden. Of course, in pattern recognition, everything you want to predict is hidden. Okay? But that's how the term came. Hidden or latent, and then your measurement. Since this is one of the first machine learning things that was done without calling it machine learning or without developing graphical models, without doing conditional independence, nothing. All those topics have come up later.
But latent is something else, you know. See, there are measured variables, and latent variable could be a derived variable,
Derived
which
variable,
not
yes.
directly observed.
Can't be direct. Whatever is not directly observed.
But then the state of the variables, if you associate them to a class, the class is already available in the historical data, based on which we build the models.
I know, that's training. But in testing, when you are actually coming to test, yes, it's always when I'm testing, I don't really know what this is.
Right.
I measure this and I predict this. So it's called hidden. Then you'll say, okay, it's called hidden Markov model. Why Markov? Because I will come up with a Markov chain saying, you know, if this character, let's say it's an English word, if this is a Q, then this must be a U. If this is a U, then probability of this being an E is so much and so much. So there's a Markov chain here, and that's why they called it, for historical reasons only, a hidden Markov model. But after this tutorial, we all know that it's actually nothing but a directed graphical model where you simply have variables, and we are going to do the joint distribution, and we are going to make the joint distribution factorization simple because we know how to factor graphs like that.
So I have a question. I always thought that the difference between Markov networks and Bayesian networks was, in Markov networks there is a weight on each edge that defines which way I am going. Because if you talk about undirected architectures, that is, there is no direction. I am caught between the two states, I can keep oscillating between the two states any amount of time.
Okay. We'll come to this. Here's the thing. Suppose I am looking at an image. Okay? Will you say that this pixel caused the next pixel? This pixel is this pixel, that pixel is that pixel. If they are both neighbors, so I will connect them.
But they go together.
They go together. So there is no direction of causality. It's not that this has caused that. So in such cases, I will represent it usually as a Markov random field. Okay? And if you have this causality, that recession caused company to fail, or I say I'm representing image motion, I'm predicting depth from motion, so I will say this causes this, right? So depending on your application, you will use either a directed graph or a directed graph. The terms used, whether it's called Bayesian or Markov, people have gone all over the place. As I just told you, the labels are mixed up because for historical reasons.
For the sake of convenience and a better understanding, can I call the undirected graph as bidirectionally connected? Or I don't have the...
Yeah, yes, the way the concept is working it is.
But again, intuition.
Yeah, they are both connected. Both, you are saying that this causes this, or you are saying that
doesn't mean anything to me. I'm more comfortable with direct stuff. So can I call it bidirected?
I don't know whether some people will say Vedu cannot authorize new nomenclature of these things.
No, the thing is that the next person. The next person. Okay.
One more thing, see, point was that suppose you have a graph model to describe the connectivity between cities or so. Over there, there's always a weight on the thing that tells me which I prefer, one over the other.
We do that.
But
That part
there is no weight, assuming that both the weights cannot, like in this case we're talking about random variables.
Yeah.
Like the weight on both the edges, outgoing edges cannot be 1.
Yeah, so we'll have probabilities, right? So I'll show you in the example, okay? Just give me 1 second. So now there is another term which electrical engineers use, it's called Kalman filter. It's nothing but an HMM where in HMM the hidden labels here are discrete. The measurements can be discrete or continuous. You can measure, you know, how much is the intensity, how much is the gradient of the image, and all those things are real values. Or you can have, you know, discrete. W is always discrete for HMM. If W is also continuous, it becomes Kalman filter. That's the only difference. Okay? Yeah. Now there are other models. Now what is a Markov random field? People say I'm using a Markov random field. In Markov random field, so let's say these, look at this grid W, look at the grid of W. The blue edges are connecting, and there are no arrows. Okay? And from each W I have an arrow pointing down, red arrow for the X. So this is actually a mix. It is both directed and undirected. This is a Markov random field. Because these labels, I am not showing you any causality, I am not saying one causes the other, they are just connected. And I want to capture that part of being connected. And each of these, this is the measurement based on which I am going to predict the value here. So let's say I am doing segmentation of sky, tree, water, and so on, classification. Then based on this measurement, I will tell you what that is. Okay. Now, the reason I asked for some help with some students is, I want some banking applications for HMM, for Kalman filter, for a Markov random field, or tree model. Tree means nothing. Instead of a grid, you have a tree on the top. And then you have the same thing. So that we can explain for the students here, you know, better these techniques. Because I find it very difficult. I tried my best with the recession example, but it's not a very good example.
Okay, let me conclude just a little bit. Now we all understood what HMM is. HMM is nothing but a graphical model like this, where I simply have a chain of the labels. So think about it, an English word, house, H-O-U-S-E. Suppose I want to tell that. So I make measurements and I will tell you what is the probability that it's an A, B, C, D, H, and so on. Then this will tell me what is the probability of going from an A to a B, B to a C, H to an O. That's what this will capture. Okay. So I'm going to take that whole joint and tell you what that word is. Okay. So in your,
Can it happen? Just please go ahead. Can it happen instead of just x1? Can it be a vector?
Yeah. By the way, thank you. These are all vectors. This is not just one feature. This is X means you can have many different dimensions of it. Yes. So you have x1 to x, that a huge feature vector. Okay. The 1, 2, 3 here is just timestamp. That means first position, second position, third position. 2005, 2006, 2007, January, February, March. So there is a series. Whenever you have a series, a sequence, you can say I will do a check. Okay, so speech, you have a sequence, you know, in time, word, handwriting recognition, pattern. Anything you have a sequence, you will say I will do a check. Gesture recognition. I did this, then I did this, then I did this.
Sequence plus dependence.
Yeah, dependence is the knowledge that you will bring of how they are connected. What is so, if I am doing gesture recognition, after moving my hand here, I won't do that. Okay, I'll probably do this, right? So that smoothness and all those things are captured by that. Okay? And we all know now what Kalman filter is. Okay. Now let me conclude this by just the last 2-3 slides. So if I have an HMM, given a set of measurements and world states, infer the world states from the measurements. That's our problem, right? Pattern recognition or any problem. If n is large, then the model relating the two will have lots of parameters. Okay? Now X itself is multi-dimensional features. Then the world state, let's say, that has many states. I gave you 5, recession, growth, this and this. So you could have others too, right? So now if you take all of them in a joint, you will have many variables. In HMM,
The states are discrete, that means the W's are discrete, the observations are continuous. Okay, I tried to make an example of this, but I'm not really happy.
Can you just go back? Sorry. These, when you say these parameters, are you meaning variables?
No, now what will happen is, think about it, I have to do the modeling, right? So for x, now let's say you have n dimension feature vector. Now remember, if you model that with a normal distribution, given that they are continuous, so you can see there will be 2, if you do mu and sigma, so there will be that many 2 times 2, that whole thing. All those terms have to be modeled. Then this W will have so many states. Now the joint, think about the joint. I have so many variables, so W1 to Wn, depending on the time you have taken. For each of them you have these x's. All those variables will be like some hundreds of variables. Do a joint distribution of that. Okay? So the reason we are doing conditional independence is to make it as simple as possible. Take away the connections, throw away the factors which are not needed. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we do this.
Okay, so I just made this slide actually just before coming to this. I thought I should add one slide. So I drew this. So you can see that if my world states are large increase, small, unchanged, small drop for a stock value, then you can do the modeling over here. Remember we did category distributions. If there are only 2, then it's binomial. Then if you have 4, then essentially you have a category, that means lambda value means 0.3, 0.2, 0.2, 0.3, whatever, the distribution. That's the lambda. And this x's, this you can model by normal distribution. Okay, that's one way around, but the mixture of Gaussians and all those things you can do. Okay, so that's the measurements x. So that's the category distribution, and this is the normal distribution. So that during training, what you will do is, for each of these possibilities, right? This has 5 possibilities here. You model the measurements. So you say when there is a high stock rise, x distributes like this.
I don't have to model. Basically, I have the historical data over here.
No,
What am I going to do with that?
no, that is the, you use the historical data to come up with
the
it.
distributions.
Yeah, so that when you do go for test, then you will figure out, okay, I got this much of these values for x. So the likelihood, so the probability, so under which class is that most likely, right? That's how we get that before too, right? Maximum a posteriori or likelihood is essentially telling me under which class is the maximum chance of seeing this data. So we will do all those things like what we said before. Okay? So here is the thing. Suppose I'm looking at the sequence. My question is, if this is recession, growth, rise, fall, whatever, that sequence, there are, if this can take 5 different values, then the possibilities are 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 and so on, right? Which sequence is the most likely, having observed these x values? That's the question. So what W will maximize this, that is W given this, under which sequence is maximum? Which you can again write by Bayes' rule, like this. Okay? So now, you can also do the following, because doing the joint is going to be very, very difficult, right? Because it's so many parameters. We can do the following, we can do a simple approximation.
Before you go further, the sequence is predetermined, right? So we know, for example, precision case, after recession recovery and then growth, that is very much fixed.
No, okay, so that's why my example is bad.
Okay.
I'm saying, suppose you have 5 different choices, recession, growth, whatever, peak, something, 5 different choices. And so 2005, 5 choices, 2006, 5 choices, 2007, like that. Now I'm asking you, in this 5-year period, what is the most likely sequence? That means growth, recession, rise, peak, trough. Or is it trough, peak, rise? So there are 5 times 5 times 5, all those possibilities. Tell me the sequence which is most likely. Having observed, in 2005 I got this data of income, house defaults, and in 2006 I got this. So I'm looking at all of them together. I'm not saying only look at 2005 and tell me 2005, because that is not using everything in the best possible way. I'm saying you observe all these things. You have all this, the whole joint. Tell me which is the best sequence. Okay? That's HMM. So in pattern recognition, tell me what is the word. Is it HOUSE or is it HELLO or is it something else, building, or what is that sequence? Having observed these features in the first position, these features in the second, you have to look at it in the joint. You can't do, like a greedy thing, only look at the first one and predict the first. Although, because the problem is becoming intractable, that might be an option to take. You might say, having given that sequence, just tell me on the first position what is it, or second. But obviously the solution is not going to be good, as you can see in this example. Suppose I am looking at two, W1 and W2, given X1 and X2, then this is the joint, okay? If I look at the only this, that means I only look at W1 given X1, X2, then this is the maximum, okay? If I look at only W2 given X1, X2, this is the maximum, but when you multiply the two, it's actually very small. Whereas the true answer here should have been this one. This is the biggest square in this joint. Right? So there are different methods. That's a whole machine learning course you can do on what techniques should be used. The purpose of today's lecture is I just want to understand what is HMM, why conditional independence, what does it mean to be independent, okay, and how it helps. So, if you do that, you already saw this. So we are going to model the x's with normal and these with category distributions. During training, with historical data, you come up with those parameters. Then you come up with a trellis like that. So W1 can take these three values, let's say. W2 can take these three values, and so on. You tell me what is the best path. Is it this path or this path? I'm telling you that you observe X over here, so you tell me which is most likely, X which is most likely, but also keep in mind the transitions, that once you have chosen this, it's better, easier to go here rather than here. So you look at the entire lattice, look at how the observations are giving you some predictions on the world state, and also keep in mind the transitions between the world states. So,
you mentioned dynamic programming earlier.
yeah, I mean to solve that.
It will also come from
Same. Yeah, bigger is the dynamic programming algorithm. So what you do is, think about it like this now. You came up with a graph. You said W1 causes W2 causes Wn. X, you got that. Based on your application, you got that. Now you think about a joint distribution. All the x's, all the w's, all put together. Okay, you have to model that. Okay, it's going to be very, very difficult, right? So many parameters. Then you said, well, let me see if I can make things simpler. Now this term is observe x, predict w. Observe x, predict w. Okay, that's this term. This term is, what is the probability once you have picked a w, the next w is going to be this. So after recession, P. After A, B. So that's this term, right? This is the sequence, Wn given Wn minus 1. These two have to be looked at together to figure out which is the best path. So there you have Viterbi algorithm, dynamic programming, all those methods are to find. Yes, okay, so this is essentially this. So here is the trellis. So this is the dynamic programming. What you will do is, you will figure out the values only given x, what is the w over here, that's the u term. Then you also look at these terms, that means what is the probability of transitioning from this to this, this to this, this to this. Over here I have all the world states. So you can have 5 different world states. This is the time sequence. Okay? So if I have already chosen this world state, what is the probability of next going to this one state or this or this or this. So you take that, multiply that with what is the probability having seen this x, which of these, what are the probabilities?
It will become the maximum.
Yeah, so then you pick the best path, that is the dynamic programming of Viterbi. Viterbi will tell you, given a trellis like this, so you have two terms, right? You have this term, which is the transition, the probabilities of going from one state to the other. And you also have this term, which is having observed this x, which is the most likely. See, if you're looking at a bird, I look at an O shape, circle shape. I will say it's most likely a character O. But having observed the previous one and then the next one, you might say, oh no, that's actually an A. Although you think it's an O, it's actually an A. But that knowledge is coming because you know what is more likely having seen the previous one. Okay? So both are coming together to give you the best solution. So this is more of a algorithmic technique. What we are interested in machine learning today is what is HMM. So if tomorrow we ask students saying what is HMM, they will all answer. They will draw the graph and say this is how it is. There is a chain of states, there is observations, there is independence among the data measurements given the state. Okay? I think with that I'll conclude. I mean, this we can work out, and I can go through a session of working out the example with values and showing you, exactly how it works.
No, you have that example?
This thing I can build it up. This is just showing, actually we'll need about 20 different slides to show how each path. It will take effort. Maybe a student needs to do it. Yeah. So now, let's conclude by saying joint distributions, graphical models, set of conditional independence relations, factorizations, we have seen all of these. Two different types of models. Directed models is easier, usually. Undirected is harder. And that concludes the session. Thank you very much.